access and take it away.
Gotcha. Let's see how it goes here. All right. Do you guys still see my screen here?
Your audio is a little garbled.
Oh, really? Gotcha.
That's better. That's better.
Okay. Cool. Well, let's see. Hopefully it holds up here. But see how it goes here. Yeah. So I'm going to give a little talk here on incremental static regeneration with Next.js and on Vercel. So I want to talk about basically what it is at a high level, why you should care about it or why it matters, why it's useful. Go through kind of like a canonical type use case, and then just talk kind of about when you maybe wouldn't want to use it, and then took a shot at kind of creating a non-typical kind of weird use case with it, just to kind of explore a little bit. So briefly, I guess my name is Travis. I'm a software developer here in Charleston. I work at a company called Sovereign with some cool people here. Jess is in here. And we've basically built a couple of things. We built ratequote.com, comparecredit.com, recently businessloans.com. And we use React, we use Next.js, and we use Vercel and some other stuff, but we use these things in production and on a daily basis. So I think one thing to talk about is, so incremental static regeneration is kind of it's a lot of words. Kind of a lot of garble, but basically the key to understanding it, or the key to understanding why it might be useful, is just understanding static generation in general. So the idea of static generation in general is taking things that you might do, typically, say you're gonna render something on a server, spit it out to the user. You're basically gonna kind of pre-render all that stuff. You're going to move it to this build step and basically go through the operation of rendering this thing and turn as much as you can into static markup. So you can basically stick it wherever you need to. You could stick it on a CDN, something. You can kind of eliminate some of the moving parts there, and it really has kind of two main benefits with that. One benefit is that if you have, say you're talking to a service that might be flaky or might be slow, you can basically do all those expensive operations or slow operations, during the build time, render your content, and then when the user goes to hit your site, they're not having to wait for anything there. You've already done the kind of heavy lifting up front. So that's basically one big benefit. The other big benefit of moving stuff to a pre-deploy kind of step is that it also gives you an opportunity to fail. It gives you an opportunity for bugs to happen, for bugs to surface before you actually put this thing out into the wild. So you might have something where you're interacting with some API or something like that, or some service, some computation, something that you're doing, and it gives you an opportunity to fail during the build process and abort the deploy before actually pushing that out. So that's basically the two big benefits that I see of moving stuff that can be dynamically rendered into something that's rendered once and then you basically kind of cache the results and give those out from that time forward. So that's the kind of general idea of static generation. And we use that heavily at Sovereign on most of our sites to kind of reduce the amount of moving parts and help with performance and make us kind of robust to things like traffic spikes and that kind of stuff. But there are some limitations of static generation. So first, before I get into the specific one, so obviously one kind of given of static generation is that it really only works well if you're giving the same content to all your users. If you have a scenario like a logged in experience or something like that, and you have to maybe authenticate users or give different content to different users, static generation kind of tends to break down there. It's not really a good fit for that use case. But that aside, assuming this is a situation where you are giving the same content to basically all of your users or close to the same content, it can be helpful. But even in that scenario, there are some situations where it starts to be kind of cumbersome. Basically, you've moved all the complexity to this kind of pre-deploy step, this build step, and so as you continue to build the site, work on things get more complex. Inevitably, that build step gets longer and longer. It takes a longer period of time. So basically, like as that build process takes a longer period of time, or maybe you have a situation where I don't know, you have a CMS in there and you have multiple people kind of working in there and adding content, and those updates to content become more frequent, require more deploys. Basically, anytime that the pain point becomes that builds become a pain point or a friction point or waiting for builds, it is a spot where static generation kind of starts to break down a little bit, and leaves you kind of looking for something a little bit better in some respects. So that's basically the promise of incremental static regeneration. So it is the basic idea is taking this static build process that previously happened as a pre-deploy step, and now moving it into a Lambda that's going to get executed on demand periodically based on requests coming into your system. So so basically the short of it is that a user might request a page, and with this setup, the user will get the page from the cache first that's been basically pre-rendered. But then behind the scenes, what happens is that the rendering logic fires and what's in the cache gets replaced, and then the next user comes in and they get the updated version of the cache. So it's kind of like a best of both worlds, or kind of compromise between rendering everything on demand for the user and getting the most updated content, or and that other end of the extreme where you're rendering everything at basically getting a snapshot in time, rendering everything, and then users get it quickly from the cache, but they just get that one version, and then you need an entire build to replace the whole thing. With incremental static regeneration, you can replace just pages at a time, or different bits at a time. So you don't have to wait for a build to go out. You don't have to fire a build to basically get your new content. So I think I'm going to go ahead and jump into a little demo. because I'm probably not making a ton of sense as I'm talking through this. So I think it'll be easier to see. So I have a little demo here. I've deployed just a basic kind of demo site on Vercel. And I have it talking to Notion. So Notion, just a little while ago, kind of released an API to get content from Notion. So in kind of a canonical situation, you would have maybe a CMS basically backing the content on, a blog or a product catalog or something like that. So I'm going to use Notion here. It's kind of like a lightweight CMS. So I have in here basically kind of three little examples. So static generation, and I'll jump into the code after this, but I want to just basically show kind of how it works first. So static generation would be the scenario where this page was rendered and then stuck in the cache when the build went out. So it basically took a snapshot of these data over here and rendered it into this little page over here. So you're seeing this here, and it looks like this is UTC time, but basically it looks like that went out. I put the build out like just before 5. So this page, reached out to Notion, grabbed the data, and then turned it into markup. So that is kind of one version of this, and I can show basically what that looks like here. So basically, NextJS gives us a couple convenience functions that get basically bundled up, and in this scenario just gets fired at build time. Grabs data, this is grabbing this data from over here on Notion, and then providing that as attributes, as props to this component, which in this just renders this list. So it's basically a snapshot at this time. So this is slightly different than this version here with incremental static regeneration. The difference being that here I'm able to go in, add a new animal. So add some new data over here. Now this doesn't come in live, but as users continue to interact with the site, the cache will be updated behind the scenes. So it's probably going to take a couple of refreshes here. First version is going to be coming from the cache, and then we should get another version here. Yeah. So now behind the scenes, the cache was updated. None of this is, firing in the user's browser or, we don't have any web server sitting there doing that. What's happening is a Lambda behind the scene is firing, pulling in data, and then pushing that data over to the cache. And now we've requested this page again with this new data included. So you can see this timestamped updating, close to current. If we go back to the static version, this was fired at build time. This will not be updated. It's still, a snapshot of that point in time. So there's really only, as far as the actual implementation details, when you're using Next, It's a very small change that you have to add. This is basically this, same version of the page, but with one key difference in this get static props function. Basically give it a parameter that tells it how old it should allow the cache to be before it goes and refetches new data. Basically goes off and checks for new data. And that's, if you're, using Next and Vercel, it all plays super nicely together. So that is, literally the only thing you have to add to get that kind of behavior. So as far as the actual benefits you get from that, you're not pushing anything expensive. You still don't have any moving parts really. You have kind of the same kind of simple setup as, just this static generated content. So if you, go down and pull this page, the static version is going to look whoops, sorry. You're basically just getting that HTML markup with both versions of these. However, using incremental static regeneration, you get to stay up to date without having to push a new build every time you put in new content. So it's a nice flow when you have a situation like you're backing your sites with some type of content management system that's being updated by whoever on a fairly frequent basis. So these will continue to go ahead and pipe in here as we go. Yeah, the important bit, you kind of see the each time you're refreshing, you're still getting the first time you hit after that new data goes in, you're still getting data from the cache. You're still getting that page from the cache, and then following that you get the updated version. So there's a couple benefits. I mean, obviously one of the big benefits of this is performance. Like you could have your data fetching be relatively slow or relatively expensive. You can reduce the amount of calls if you're trying to reduce the cost of using some service, or you can reduce the amount of time the user is waiting, so that they're rather than going and then hitting the Notion API, they're going, hitting some CDN, getting back data, and then the slow bit of fetching data, shaping data, that can all be done basically kind of behind the curtains, and the user doesn't have to be impacted by that at all. So that's kind of that's the big benefit there. The other big benefit that I see is basically if you're interacting with a service, often we have sites using reaching out to a bunch of different services, and each one, if the performance of your site is dependent on that service being available 100% of the time, as you're adding more services, each one basically has the potential to impact the user's experience on your site. So if Notion were to go down or something, we wouldn't have data here if we were fetching it live. But using this this setup, if we hit Notion once, get back data, we cache that data, and then we go and hit it again in a few minutes. And if Notion were down, rather than giving back the user nothing, we would give back the data that we had previously cached. So it makes it more resilient in terms of depending on external services. So I actually have a version here where I have so the version that's deployed here, basically have it set to, air out half the time to kind of act flaky. So we have another page here that we can demo that behavior. This is going to go make the same request, but we're asking it to basically fail every other time, or half the time. So we've actually hit this. What's the route on this one? So there's. So we're seeing this version, and you notice it doesn't have some of this new data in here. This is most likely because it failed. Yeah, if you look at the timestamp, we're actually seeing the cached version from a while ago, and we can assume that that last call probably failed. So if we hit it a couple of times, eventually we should get a success that goes through, and we should see updated data. Well, it should. There we go. Not sure why that took so many times, but we can kind of follow along with what's going on there. If we look at, we can actually see these functions failing as we go, but still seeing data come through. So you see this, this is basically succeeding sometimes, failing other times. But on the user's end of that, they're not impacted at all, besides, maybe data is a little bit slower getting to them, but, they still get what they need, and then, have a pretty good experience there. So we could go ahead and continue to add, and now as you go, same kind of scenario. Might take a couple, couple visitors going, hitting the page. It's odd that it's taking so long. Okay, this last version should have updated the cache. Let's see now. Yeah. Okay. So, didn't know how well I spoke about that, but that I think is the kind of the, again, the kind of two big benefits are better performance on the user's end, hiding slow things from them, and hiding buggy things, hiding flaky things, so that their experience is pretty good. And you've just moved the, you moved things that might be impacting their performance, or might be impacting their experience, to places where they can't see it, places where it's basically hidden from them. So yeah, I think that's kind of, this is a simple version, but I think it captures the canonical kind of use case, where I think when they released this feature, what they were really thinking about was sites backed by a content management system, things like product catalogs and stuff like that, where you basically have kind of slow moving data. I think yeah, I have kind of one more small thing to talk about, but I guess I should probably stop and see if there are any questions or anything that I could try and speak more clearly about. Okay. So one thing that I did kind of want to talk about is, so this is kind of marketed by Next and Vercel, but it really isn't a Next specific feature. I mean, they provide these kind of convenience functions, these these data fetching functions that you can stick on your page, on your page components in Next, that make it really easy to interact with this. And Vercel basically kind of takes care of all the complexity and deploys things to lambdas, handles the interpreting the caching directives on the CDN, and does what it needs to do. But you could actually use this outside of Next. You could use it with any type of data that you're trying to stick back on the CDN and that kind of stuff. It's dependent on your hosting service and what they do with the caching directives. But what's happening behind the scenes is they are basically sticking this stale while revalidate caching directive on these responses. And Vercel as a hosting platform is then using that to determine the behavior at the edges of the CDN. And so any hosting platform that kind of treats this in the same way, and I'm not entirely sure which ones are doing it. I know we specifically moved to Vercel to support this feature from Netlify, which wasn't doing it at the time. But basically, there's nothing specific about Next that allows this feature. There are just some kind of conveniences in it that make it kind of possible, or make it easier to use, I should say. But what I wanted to point out is kind of a different kind of use case, where instead of doing this in a page component in NextJS, what we have here is, let me go ahead and close this. So what we have here is actually a just basically, and it's a API route in Next, but you can think of it as this is essentially just a lambda that gets deployed to AWS and run. And here we're setting these caching directives as stale while revalidate, and going ahead and sticking it on the response. And so what we're doing with this is, rather than rendering a page in Next, we're just outputting some data, and we're kind of using the CDN as kind of some pseudo state that we're putting there. So this is it's kind of wonky. You wouldn't really want to use this in real life, but this is kind of like a visitor counter. So if you look at it, it's we're hitting an endpoint, and then the endpoint is kind of recursively hitting itself, getting data back, and then incrementing that data. So incrementing a counter there. So you can kind of use that as this weird little counter, and it's just kind of more of a thought experiment, kind of playing around with how this works and what we can do with it, rather than something real. But we go ahead and hit this. So that should be, there's the initial data that comes back from this is going to be, there's no data there, so it's going to take a second to update. But once that response comes back, gets stuck on the CDN, and then it refers to itself it should start updating. Eventually. There we go. So you kind of see the behavior too of this, you know, this kind of feature for, you know, how it behaves is it doesn't really fit a scenario where you have fast moving data. It fits a scenario where you want to simplify something and the user doesn't need, the user needs close to the most up-to-date data, because they're always getting a stale version from the cache first, and then that cache gets updated. So it's good for slow-moving data. You know, it simplifies things and lets you remove some of the moving parts if that works. If you need something where you need accurate data at any moment, you have fast-moving data, it's not a very good fit. And you also kind of need a situation where you have enough traffic to kind of keep things fresh. If you have a scenario where, you know, say like a personal blog or something, you know, and a user comes and then you don't get another user for say 3 days or something. Now the first user that comes and hits your site again is going to get data from 3 days ago as they first did it. And until they start interacting with the site more, that's when, you know, things get updated behind the scenes. But if you don't have that kind of baseline level of traffic, then you know, there's basically data gets too stale as it goes up. So yeah, I think basically, yeah, that's not probably not super clear, but that's what I wanted to talk about. So any questions or anybody want to talk about something?
There was a question from Trey.
Oh,
is Vercel the web server? Not sure
yeah.
the relationship between Vercel and NextJS.
Yeah, gotcha. So I should probably, yeah, I kind of skipped over a little bit of context there. Vercel is, yeah, you can kind of think of it like a web server. It's a web hosting platform, and rather than a, let's see, we should go to their, probably their marketing. So it's, yeah, there we go. Rather than having, so it's not a web server in the sense that you have a box somewhere sitting there processing things, but it does fill that kind of same space. It's a, I guess I would call it a deployment platform. So it is deploying functions that you're writing to a serverless runtime environment. So something like AWS and running those functions. And then the results of that, it is caching and sticking on a CDN. So it's playing the same role as a web server would be playing, but in kind of a different way sometimes. There's not a box running 24/7, but yeah. And then NextJS is a particular type of JavaScript React framework for building websites, web applications. So yeah, I guess you could think of NextJS as the application framework and Vercel as the hosting platform.
Cool. Any other questions from the group? I've got a question. So there's ISR, which this is incremental status state revalidation. Was it?
Yeah, incremental static
Static.
regeneration. is what
Okay.
they call it.
And then Netlify has something that's similar now, right? Called SSR or something like that.
Well, they're doing the same thing. So Netlify kind of jumped through some hoops to try and get kind of feature parity with Vercel. So both Netlify tried to kind of fully support the stuff that Vercel was offering with NextJS. So it's both the SSR. They're doing the thing that Netlify didn't support was they weren't actually caching those results.
Okay.
They were basically they're firing it each time, and then not kind of updating the cache behind the scenes. So most have changed it really recently, but as of like a couple months ago, they would support those same functions that in Next.js that they provide, get static props, get server side props. They supported both those functions and they would work, but get static props with that revalidation option is what determines that caching behavior. And it was just basically firing get static props as if it was get server side props. It was firing it each time and not caching the results.
Cool. As a developer, how do you determine if you need this feature or not? Is there like any kind of key indicators in use cases that point to, hey, I should be using this feature?
Yeah, I think so. So one, the big caveat is if you're generating your content statically in the first place, and that is something that I think always makes sense if you can, because it reduces the amount of moving parts. And the criteria to if you can do that is basically the big one is, can you give the same content to everybody? If you can do that, then it often makes sense to generate that content ahead of time and cache it and then give it to everybody. And then if you're kind of over that hurdle and you're able to generate that content statically and you're kind of getting the benefits of that, performance and pushing the bugs to before you deploy it, then there's no reason to add the extra complexity of this unless builds are becoming a problem. So if it's becoming a pain to fire builds all the time, or you're having to wait a long time for those builds, or you're worried about deploying bad content and having to go back in quickly and update that content to fix something, that's really the criteria. It is the time it takes for a build to go out, or the effort it takes for a build to go out, causing friction in the workflow, I guess.
Cool. And so it does caching and does cache invalidation. Does it have anything to do with kind of communicating to the browser to cache stuff on the browser side, or is this always just kind of at the edge or at the CDN level?
It's just at the CDN level. Because I think because they're worried about invalidating that data when you do push a new deploy, and so they want basically control of the caching to be moved to the edges rather than all the way down to the browser, so that they can invalidate at that level, and then a new deploy goes out, new content. for the user. But that said, you can explicitly, like we did in that other example, you can explicitly set some different caching directives on there. I'm not sure within those kind of convenience data fetching functions if you can do that, but definitely in like API responses and stuff like that, you can provide your own caching headers.
Very cool. Looks like some awesome tech. Guys, any other questions before we call it a day? Chris, Trey, Jesse, Jessica. Okay. Cool, Travis. Thank you. That was very awesome. I know Next is kind of growing in popularity. It's really amazing how popular React is, and Next seems to be the standard for React these days. Do you see any other competitors that is something you would look into versus Next, or are you pretty much happy with the Next Vercel stack?
I really think within React, Next is just so the couple of things that I mean, it basically takes care of Webpack configs, and you get to kind of just jump in and get started, and you kind of get code splitting by design because everything is split on a page by page level. They're all kind of think of them as like each little mini applications, or mini single page applications. So I think I'd be hard pressed if I was doing something in React to not want to try and use Next. But I would think that these type of like static build kind of hybrids are going to be, I think they already are, but I mean, like coming to a lot of other frameworks outside of React, like I would expect this kind of stuff, if it's not already there, like coming to like Svelte and Vue and that kind of stuff as well. So
yeah, I was thinking about Gatsby used to be really popular a few years ago, and then trying to think, I think there's a new framework called Remix coming out by the guys with React Router and stuff, and then there's Create React App, and that's all in the kind of the React ecosystem. But it seems like Next is kind of winning the meta framework battle.
Yeah, Remix might be interesting because it's a little different. I think between Next and Gatsby, because they're kind of filling a similar spot for a while, but I think between those two, Next kind of allows you to go in a couple of different directions, where Gatsby kind of fits better with only doing static generation, and Next kind of allows a mix of do these things static, this thing we need dynamically all the time. So I feel like Next kind of won out between those two for that reason. Yeah, Remix kind of takes that other approach of almost kind of like doing even more on the box side of things, on the server kind of side of things.
Cool. Yeah, Trey, to answer your question, to my knowledge, Create React App is kind of a competitor to NextJS. Create React App is all kind of client side. So you wouldn't get static. You would have to manually do static server rendering or server side rendering. But you can. I've done it before, and it's super painful. So like Travis said, to get page splitting, get server side rendering, incremental static, rendering, regeneration, whatever. All of that is in the box with NextJS and Vercel. So if you don't have to think about those things, it's probably good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, before we close out, is there anything anyone would like to hear at the next React meetup? Any kind of technology that that's kind of something you're exploring, something you'd like to learn more about in terms of the React ecosystem? Cool, Chris. All right. Well, we will dig in. If you have any side comments, just hit me up. And Travis, thanks again for this presentation. I think that was very informative, very much on the leading edge of React. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great day. Next week, if you're available, Casey Wilson will be doing a presentation on TensorFlow, our AI and JavaScript. So even if, you know, I think it would be worth checking out TensorFlow and see what you can do with AI and JavaScript. Of course, if you can do anything in computer science, then you can do it in JavaScript. Yeah, React charting libraries, I'll dig into that. David, that's a good suggestion. And yeah, Angular is similar to React. Trey, I think you'll find the component architecture model are very similar, just a little bit of different opinions one way or another. But yeah, React is definitely worth digging into. I would definitely recommend it if you have time to learn it. And NextJS makes it super easy. So cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Travis. Hope everyone has a great afternoon, and we'll see you guys next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.